Hi, everyone. My name is Paris. I work at Google. Welcome to December 5th edition of Meet Our Contributors. Today, we are joined by two awesome current contributors. Also, Jeff, too, he's on our ones and twos live streaming YouTube for us, while George is unfortunately not available for us today. However, we are going to get down to business, and what this next hour is going to provide everyone is a quick answer and question and answer session for these current contributors on all things upstream Kubernetes. First, we'll start out with some introductions, but first things first, everybody should be aware that we do abide by the Cloud Native Compute Foundation's Code of Conduct, and that means please be respectful to each other on all of our communication mediums. We're going to be answering questions today on Slack, so that would include that's the Meet Our Contributors channel. You can also find me in direct message on Slack if you would rather remain anonymous. And then you can also find me on Twitter, and feel free to reach out to me on any medium. And we're going to go right into introductions. So Justin, why don't you quickly give folks an introduction on yourself, how you got into Kubernetes, what you've been working on. Go ahead.
Awesome. So my name is Justin Santa Barbara. I am Justin SB on GitHub and Slack and stuff like that. I have been involved in Kubernetes for a number of years now. It looks like I was just put up my PR list. It looks like my first PR was in November 14th, 2014. So that's 4 years. That's a long time. I mostly, I started initially working on AWS support for Kubernetes. Did a lot of sort of the initial build up of that code. And later, a couple of years ago, I started was one of the people that started the COPS project, which is sort of, I guess, the primary open source installation tool on AWS. And I joined Google about 6 months ago, working on the experience team, so involved in Google as well, and hopefully you'll see increasingly good support for GCE as well in COPS. But yeah, very involved in COPS, a lot of knowledge of the AWS code in Kubernetes, and cluster API.
I'm sure we'll hear some cluster API questions later, so be prepared for that. Zach.
Hi, I'm Zach Corlison. I am one of the chairs of SIG Docs. How did I come to Kubernetes? About a year and a half ago, I met a colleague at Google. I had just left GitHub, and my colleague said, hey, I've got this cool documentation set I want you to work on. Will you come do that? And I said, yeah, sure, what is it? And fish on is how that went. So that's how I got involved in Kubernetes. Before that, I was at GitHub, then at Rackspace before that, and a number of tech startups going back a certain number of years. Things that I love doing in Kubernetes SIG Docs, new contributors. I love getting new contributors in the door. SIG Docs is one of the easier paths into Kubernetes membership. And there's a well-established, well-defined contribution guide for how anyone, anywhere can review PRs, contribute to Kubernetes documentation, and become a member of the Kubernetes org.
Awesome. All right. Our first question is a light one. They want to know, out of all of the open source projects that are in the world, especially in the infrastructure space, why Kubernetes? Why contribute your time to this versus another project?
I mean, I can try that one. It's a difficult one. I think I can tell you why it's important for me. I think it's an open source project which is making a real difference and has a lot of people actually using it. I think some of the reasons for that are that, at least initially, there were the the majority of the contributors were from Google and Red Hat, and I feel like Google brought sort of like a long-term roadmap from their board experience, and Red Hat brought a sort of hands-on, like, we need to make it be a useful pass. And I think that combination like really drove it in the early years. I think there's still a ton to be done, and I think the architecture of Kubernetes is really, really solid, particularly in terms of extensibility. And we're also figuring out a lot of the community aspects in terms of, how do we grow a project that has been to date very successful and has far more people in it that can like meaningfully work in a single GitHub repo. And so we have the technical infrastructure to enable things like CRDs, which let you collaborate in disparate projects, and we have the sort of governance infrastructure to let a lot of projects collaborate without all clobbering each other. But there are lots of other good projects which are also worthy of your time, I'm sure, but that's why I choose Kubernetes.
Zach, what about you?
Well, partially I stumbled into it. I had never fully worked on an open source project before. I had contributed sort of incidentally to like Atom at GitHub. But I guess Kubernetes was intriguing to me because at Rackspace, when we were first talking about Docker at Rackspace and about this whole idea of containerization, I found that tremendously interesting. And so when the first time that someone described Kubernetes to me as container orchestration, I halfway knew what they were talking about. I knew the container part, but not the orchestration. So it was intriguing, and that made kind of a natural fit. I should point out right now that I'm working at the Linux Foundation, and so I am working in open source all the time now. And Kubernetes in particular is, I think I've come to love open source like overall. Through Kubernetes. Kubernetes was my intro to open source as an area of contribution, and I love it. It is something that I have come to believe in very, very powerfully. And so I stumbled into Kubernetes, but have through Kubernetes have entered open source, and open source sort of in return has strengthened my involvement and my commitment to the quality of contribution with Kubernetes.
So what's different that you see with working on technical documentation for open source versus, say, a proprietary product?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I would say the biggest difference that I see is that with a proprietary product, the pool of knowledge, like the silo of knowledge, looks very small. And I say looks very small as opposed to is very small. Like the places that I would draw on for expertise in a proprietary project looks like the people who are employed by that company to work on that proprietary thing. And maybe like support or QA, or maybe like a user forum if I got really, really lucky. And with Kubernetes, expertise is distributed everywhere. So I've become a lot less shy about just putting questions about how things work out into the world, because I am constantly and routinely surprised by who knows what. So there are, I would say that with proprietary projects, there is the appearance of information silos, and there is a well-defined pool of expertise, but that isn't actually the total pool of expertise. And with open source, the pool of expertise is really democratic. So in some ways, it is more difficult because there isn't necessarily a well-defined pool of expertise, but the difference and the joy of it is that expertise, and like I have access to the actual and full pool of expertise when documenting a feature. It's really cool.
What about you, Justin? What's the difference? What are some of the main differences that you see with code with working on or developing something for proprietary versus open source?
I think the big difference is the sort of number of people involved. I think, you know, we've done a lot of work to make it so that, I don't know how many contributors Kubernetes has, presumably Paris, you can tell me, but I think it's at least thousands, if not, that might be off by orders of magnitude, but thousands, let's say. And thankfully, they're not all like working on the same file, and certainly, definitely spread across directories and across repos. But we have hundreds of contributors on COPS, and obviously, some of them contribute a lot more than others, but everyone is very welcome, and it's great to see any contribution. And it makes it harder when you're working on something which is more just, in a commercial organization, you might own a particular subsystem entirely, and you have to make it work for you. And it's more a smaller group. And in open source, you have to make sure that your code is much more amenable to random people coming in and dipping their toe in and having a look at it and being able to contribute effectively. And it's also amusing because I certainly am not always the most disciplined of coders, and people will do great jobs of like reviewing it and pointing out where I have erred and coming in and often fixing those things, which is great to see. 5 years later, a typo I made or 3 years later, a typo I made will get fixed. And
that's actually oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's just amusing to like get caught on my errors, which is fun.
I was going to say that's a perfect segue into the next question, actually, which is from a current reviewer. And they are looking for tips on how to deal with with an influx of typo PRs and things that are, either extra small or not necessarily priority, and it's taking up time. What are some, best practices or tips? And I know, Zach, I think you probably have some best practices here as well. But what are some best practices too, Justin? You have on like the code side as well. So I think both of you will have good feedback here. So whichever one would like to go first, go ahead.
Justin, go for it.
Okay, I'm probably not going to toe the party line here. I should warn you. I think Linus Torvalds on the kernel has actually weighed in on this very issue, and is like everyone starts with typos, right? I actually thought my first PR was a typo PR. It actually wasn't, but I thought it was. And
what is it?
it was to add IPv6 support. So really rocking it. We're like, I'm sure we'll have full IPv6 support. But I do think that I personally think that typo PRs are a great way, or smaller PRs are a great way into the project. They don't take much time to review individually. So I tend to motivate myself by thinking, it's another point on DevStats or whatever it is, or another point on like the GitHub graph, right? Let's just look at it. If it's good, I will merge it or approve it. And I tend to motivate myself that way and be like, you just get through them and hope that.
So you just review as they come. And you don't batch them weekly or like put a little 30-minute typo appointment on your calendar.
I'm not great. I think I referred earlier to my lack of discipline. I'm not great about doing that, but when I see one come in, I think we should just approve them and get them in.
Good.
I actually have different projects have different philosophies, but like in COPS, for example, if we have certain areas that are not a new area of functionality, if it isn't breaking things, I will be inclined to merge the code in general. So I'm very much, I call it merge and iterate, rather than like trying to get the PR exactly right from the start. And I feel like that's much more productive. We can't necessarily do that in Kubernetes, where a very subtle change can like cause hundreds or thousands of people hours and hours of lost time to like double check and dot every I and cross every T. But when that's not the case, I do think it's good to, if it's not going to really break things, that we can just let it in. So I'm in favor of rapid merging, and I'm in favor of, if you want to do a typo PR, that's fine by me. please don't send me a million like over the next hour. But it's great, and I think it's a great way to get into the project. I do think we don't necessarily have to have them. I don't think you should do typo PRs if that's your only intention in the project. It's valuable, but I think it's a way in, and you should leave that way in for others if you're not using it to get into the project.
I have a follow up to that, but I want to hear Zach's first. So Zach.
So we do get a lot of typo PRs, maybe somewhat obviously. So for us, it is actually kind of it's great to see the work and the contribution, but occasionally we'll get a really enthusiastic contributor who will open a PR for like a 1-character change. And in those cases, we ask folks, hey, just batch your PRs, like gather all of these together, make a single PR out of them. Generally for like extra small PRs, we ask folks to like aggregate changes until it becomes a small PR, so that there's a substantive enough amount of changes to review, just to reduce the burden of review. The way that we review PRs in SIGDocs, that's maybe a different question. But we have a review process that we try to keep the number of PRs open in K website like under 100. When things get over 100, that's usually a sign that we're not keeping ahead of the work. So we ask folks to batch their PRs, bundle changes. So we occasionally get like someone will run a linter on blog posts and things like that, and that's great. But if the blog post is older than a year,
what's a linter too for folks that might not know?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
A linter is something that so the phrase linter comes from like a lint brush, where you brush the lint off of a sweater and make it look nice. So it's something that a linter is a piece of software that you run to make your code pretty, or that changes the format to look nice and conformant. It's a way of quickly catching routine typos, broken links, things like that. So it's basically it's the equivalent of doing the sort of light housekeeping on documentation. And it's valuable, but we ask for, especially for blog posts, that people can find changes to blog posts within the past year, because older than that, we'll let it ride.
And that's kind of a part of the follow-up. The follow-up is, what if it's the case of an individual contributor that's only submitting these trivial typo PRs? Like, do you ever step in and comment and say, thanks, but why don't we try something else? Or thanks, but but ... Just have you ever run into that case before where you've just had someone that was just hitting you with extra small, like extra small, like even like in Zach's case, like with the historical things where it's kind of like me, like what would you do in that kind of a situation?
There have been people that I've noticed that do that more than others. I don't mind. I think it's fine. I imagine eventually they'll run out of typos. I'm not a great speller, but eventually, maybe
eventually they'll run out of typo. Eventually everything will be to dictionary.com standards.
Never know.
Zach, what about you? Like, what if you has there ever been a time where your owners have said like, hey, I don't know what to do with this contributor because they are just keep getting into the extra small / typo fixes, and it would be nice if we can kind of step in. And have you ever done that kind of a mentoring or coaching with a contributor before?
Yes, we're always grateful for the help and for the contribution. But in cases, it doesn't happen regularly. I'd say it happens maybe once a quarter, where we get, it's usually someone who's a new contributor will come in and just be very enthusiastic about their contributions. But usually we'll see like a pattern, like someone will open like 5 to 10 PRs of the same sort in a row. And our reviewers are really good about stepping in and saying, hey, please bundle these all together. or like in the case where it would be like more effort to actually go through and close all the PRs, we'll say, hey, next time, please do this. Please bundle small changes together. So it's, I mean, I honestly don't think it's a case of gamification so much as it's just really enthusiastic contribution. And it's great to have that enthusiasm. And so that kind of active intervention, we always want to be really gentle with people who are coming in and contributing valuable work. But yeah, we do step in and ask folks to, I guess, be more mindful of their contribution process and the things that are going to make it easier for their work to get reviewed and more likely to get merged.
Two different approaches, which is good. I like that. That just shows contributors that they, again, should be mindful of where they're contributing. For everybody listening, each repo better have a contributing.md file. I guess that was a subliminal message to all of my maintainers out there. I know Justin's like, do I? Yes, and those contributing markdown files typically point back to our main contributing guide. However, plenty of other special interest groups and maintainers and things like that have indeed housed their own contributing markdown file that really touches on some of the special characteristics of that SIG. So for instance, in Zach's case, they do have their own contributing doc because they do have different workflows and things along those lines.
Right, but now I'm terrified that that our contributing.md doesn't actually point to our contribution guidelines.
Well,
within 10 minutes after this podcast is done.
This is a good test for everybody that's listening. Like, do I have a contributing markdown file? Let me check on that. Yes, that's really good. And yeah, for everybody listening, you can always point it directly to the main contributing guide that's in the community folder. And again, if you have some kind of special characteristic about your special interest group or working group or what have you, included in your contributing markdown file. That is, like, if you think that contributors out there are doing things that you don't necessarily want them to do or behaving a way in your workflow that you don't necessarily want them to behave, or you want to welcome certain positive behavior characteristics, etc. All of that stuff is excellent for a contributing guide, and then you can always point folks to that contributing guide as you are identifying behavior that isn't really good for you. Like, again, in a case where someone's submitting tons of typos, you can always say, hey, this read this contributing guide. This has some step-by-step guide and how to get involved in a more valuable way, and things along those lines. So that was just my little tidbit there. So earlier this morning, we actually had a lot of questions around KubeCon. So I'm going to ask a couple of those here, just because I got so many. A lot of first-time KubeCon, Cloud Native Con goers this morning who were DMing me, asking me for mentors to give them advice on what sessions they should go to, for how to best meet up with contributors, knowing that the contributor summit is full. What are some other tips that you can give to both current, aspiring, and maintainer contributors to plug into our community while they're at this event?
I think I mentioned it this morning on Slack, but now I get to say it in person. I think there is an event on Tuesday or Wednesday. I don't remember, where you can do if you're
Tuesday.
Thank you. Or if you're an absolute beginner, you can do your first PR. I think there are some, I think mostly Google folk, but some people there helping, show how to do a PR in terms of the mechanics of that. I think I think in general, I would think about what your interest is. I think it's very difficult for someone that just wants to contribute to Kubernetes to sort of know where to start. And so I think, everyone has something they're particularly interested in and passionate about, or more so than others. So you might like networking, or you might like authentication, or you might like whatever it is, AWS or GCP. And there are SIGs that are oriented around most of the broad areas of Kubernetes. And I think all the SIGs have an intro session, or almost all the SIGs have an intro session and a deep dive, one or more deep dive sessions. And so I think thinking about where your interests align and attending sort of well, if you're totally new to the SIG, then definitely, well, it's a good idea to attend the intro session regardless. And then, yeah, the deep dive sessions are probably a great way where actually a lot of design or discussion around design happens, and you can sort of understand how the SIGs operate. In my experience, not a lot of actual decisions get made, even in the deep dive sessions, but it's good to have people meet face to face, and a lot of the discussions happen. Those discussions continue happening in Zoom meetings and then on GitHub and issues and design docs.
So tutorial on Tuesday for first-time contributors and deep dives on the maintainers track.
I think,
Seth,
and the SIG intros. But yes, but thinking about where you, but thinking about where you are most, where your special skills lie. Like, is it Kubernetes or a different CNCF project? Is it a particular area of Kubernetes? And what are you really interested in?
Let's table that too, because that's a question that I also get, but I'm going to table that for 1 second. Zach, what about you for other KubeCon related tips for both aspiring and current contributors?
I would just echo what Justin said about coming to like the new contributor day on Tuesday. It's Tuesday, right?
There's actually two. There is a Monday that's sold out with 110 people, and then there is Tuesday, which I think is already like waitlisting as well. Yeah, I know. Just for everybody that didn't listen to the morning session, we are onboarding almost 300 contributors next week. So that is awesome. Significant. And get those help wanted and good first issue labels out there, y'all. For real, people are going to be poking around in your repos. Speaking of typos, they're going to be poking around in your repos. So it's way better to get those labels out and done. I'm actually going to send an email out to our chairs and tech leads in the next day or two to remind them of that as well. But yeah, that's both of those are great tips. I definitely think that the deep dive sessions are awesome. Myself, and I think that's worthwhile. People always say, "Oh, I want to meet maintainers. You know, how do I do it?" That's how you do it. That's really the best way to do it. I mean, outside of our usual Zoom meetings, which we're on right now, that I think is the best way, face to face.
Just one quick note about SIG docs. So we will be making really big decisions at the KubeCon. SIG docs.
Oh, you have quorum. That means they have quorum. And describe what quorum is, Zach.
Quorum is where you have a majority of those who are eligible to vote on any issue that is described by or covered by the actual governance.
Very cool.
Specifically, we're going to be looking at, well, did I get it right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. It just means that you all are there there's enough people for you to be making decisions, essentially, whether it's voting or lazy consensus or what have you.
But we're looking specifically at setting our priorities for 2019 and setting those broadly, as in these are the areas that we want to work on, and then also setting specific goals for the first quarter.
That's
so
awesome.
I would say if for whatever reason you're not able to make it to that process, pay mind, especially in the Slack afterwards, because we'll be publishing and talking about those results in our Slack channel after that. So I would say that Slack is probably the most active way to get involved and follow what's happening with SIGDocs.
That's awesome. And then Justin, what about you? Are you doing I know Cluster, I feel like Cluster's got like 45 deep dives.
there's a lot of deep dives on cluster lifecycle, cluster API. I think there's one on kubeadm. There's not one on Cluster, I don't think. I think, yes, although we don't make decisions, what I think is really great about the KubeCon format is we get people that are not necessarily the people that show up every week and that have very valuable perspectives that are not necessarily the ones we get every week. and they're like, well, that's not going to work for us type thing. And that's really wonderful to hear because, a lot of the times the people that show up every week tend to be more developer types, generalizing very generally. And I feel like KubeCon has a broader audience, and it's great to hear those people that might not be able to show up every week.
Yeah, I think it's cool. You'll also probably see people who are running it in production as well, and they just kind of want to keep up with that one thing that SIG is working on, so that they can make sure that when they're building out their things that they're covered. So I think it's a great way to get feedback, get it, give it, close those loops. That's what happens at these events. Justin?
I would just want to say, I also looked at the schedule this morning, and I think there's some speed networking and mentoring sessions.
Yeah, good plug.
It looks like there's one in the morning. So if you want me, do not do that one.
Yeah, and guess the good news there. I mean, it's good / bad, but the good / bad news is that it's sold out. We have 180 people that were signed up that wanted mentorship. I know Justin's like, whoa, but we only have 60 mentors. So if you are out there and want to mentor Justin, and you really love that 7:45 in the morning local time slot, Justin, I think
you're pretty guaranteed no 7:30 slots. Then I
know what? And that's no, you know what I just remembered? That's the morning that the night before is KubeCon. I mean, it's Ice Cube Con. So Ice Cube, I know Jeff's awake from YouTube streaming right now. Like, crap, that's right. Yeah, so Ice Cube is playing the night before our mentoring slot. So I think our 7:45 a.m. is going to be uber fresh. In more ways than one. But yeah, if you are listening out there and you want to help us out with mentoring, CNCF sent out a notice, I think it was like last week, for mentor and mentee signups. Please do it. If you also have no idea what I'm talking about as far as the mentoring sign up, ping me on Slack and I will definitely get you that mentoring information. And I also just want to plug one more thing about that. You do not need to be an expert to mentor in this community. I need to reiterate that to everybody. I'm going to reiterate that until I'm blue in the face, until everybody understands. You do not need to be an expert ever to mentor anything. Your experience as a new individual in this community is equally as valuable as the expert, because again, it's about the journey, not the solution. Everybody's learning together. There is power in peer mentoring. That was my soapbox there for a second. This is mentoring, y'all, right here. We're answering questions that people would typically answer or typically ask a mentor. So mentoring comes in many varieties, and I think everybody should just be open to it and say, why not? So if both of you too, if you could send it out to your membership as well, to ask them if anybody would like to mentor, we would love to have them. Right now, it's just going to take us a while to get through all of the mentees. So the more we have, the better that will be spread out there. So thank you very much for that plug, Justin. I did not pay you to say that.
I'm signing up right now, and we can specify just the afternoon session. So I am
okay. Good. Yes. I know there was a little snafu there in the beginning where you couldn't specify which session, but now we have that covered. So definitely do that. All right. While I look for our next question here, do either of you have questions for each other? Justin, is there anything you've ever wanted to know about Docs, or is there anything you've ever wanted to know about Kob's Cluster API or every other little itty bitty thing that Justin works on?
I do have a question about cluster DNS inheritance.
Do it.
So, Justin, with cluster DNS inheritance, there was an issue a while back about who owns feature documentation for how cluster inheritance behaves. The issue that we ran into was that with cluster DNS inheritance, specifically at the node level, if you so there is a value called default. The default is not the default behavior. So who owns that feature documentation? Because it's describing what happens for DNS inheritance at the node level. So is it SIG? Is it SIG node that owns it? Is it SIG cluster lifecycle? Is it SIG cluster ops? Who owns this?
Or SIG networking, because it's DNS.
That's an awesome question.
I feel ambushed. I don't, like first I was
No,
like,
don't
oh,
feel
the people
ambushed.
isn't
Like you
people.
can
That's
totally
about.
say like, "I'll answer this later." Like,
I think what
let
we
me
have
think
to
about
think
that.
about is sorry. What we can think about is like how we would figure it out. I think
Yep.
it's fine to have a good guess. Well, first of all, I don't know if there's an issue, but an issue would be a good one. And then I think putting a particular sig on there with a guess is a good idea. And then the SIGs will likely figure out who really owns it. I guess we're talking about just documenting the behavior. So honestly, I don't know who owns DNS. It might even be apps. This is one of those ones which like really falls in between a lot of SIGs. And
Yep.
so having a good guess as to the SIG, and then the right way to get an answer on the internet is to put the wrong answer on there and let someone correct you. So I am sure you will be rapidly redirected.
Some
That's great advice. Thank you.
literally Mark Mandel, if you're listening out there, literally said the same thing to me 2 hours ago. I swear, like I feel like I'm just in this like,
Maybe
when
we're
someone's
both wrong.
repeats it. No, he said to me, he said, Paris, throw the wrong answer out there. Someone is gonna correct you. And I'm like, I never thought about that. Like, wow. Yeah, that's a question that we get a lot. The question is, how do I know what SIG owns what? And that was a perfect example of a maintainer asking another maintainer who owns what, how. And I think Justin's kind of response was pick something and somebody's going to respond to you. But in the case where you pick something and they don't respond, then what? Like, so should Zach then go to Slack and say everybody in the SIG Slack channel, or should Zach go to the mailing lists? Like, what do you think? What would like if Zach pinged on this issue, like some folks from Signode, for instance, and they didn't respond, and would his best bet then would be to go to their mailing lists?
I feel like Slack is a fairly good channel for that, particularly if you have an issue. It's reasonable. I don't know that like I tend to be overloaded by Slack or find it overwhelming, but I think Slack is a good one. If you happen to know one of the people involved, you can ask them. But
What about
Slack,
owners' files? Talk about like how people can like discover the owners through that.
yeah,
Can you talk about that a little bit? Like,
yes. So owners are one of the ways we talked about like how we've split it up so not everyone is treading on each other's toes all the time. In most directories in Kubernetes, you will see a file whose name is owners in all caps, and the intention is that file describes who owns, and I'll define that in a second, the entire subtree underneath that file. And they're typically, that file is divided into approvers and reviewers. And so reviewers are able to LGTM a PR, but that comes in underneath that directory, or that touches a file underneath that directory. And an approver is also needed to /approve that a PR. And then once you have approval and LGTM, then the PR should merge. We keep changing the rules about whether approve implies LGTM and all these sort of things, but broadly that's how it works. So the intention is basically to say who is responsible or who is knowledgeable about a particular subtree of the code. And that applies throughout all the Kubernetes projects, I believe. And you'll always find you should always find an owner's file in the top level of every repo. Those people are responsible in theory for everything in that repo. So you shouldn't, like the owner's file in Kubernetes are some of the like top maintainers of the whole project. And it would probably be overkill to ping them certainly on a typo fix. I think that would not be a great idea. But if you drill down into the subdirectories responsible, you can sort of see who owns who's responsible for the code, and you can figure out people in there that do that. Personally, I would also look at the GitHub history on that file, like who is contributing or actively working on the code. If you want to know why something changed in a particular way, or why something is a particular way, then like if you think there's a bug in there, you can look at the Git history on that file or even on those lines.
that's awesome. Thank you for that. That was a really great explanation. And Zach, your crew's using owners files these days too, right? Except your
Yes.
process is sort of a like a secondary review. Do you want to just kind of like a high level go through like what your process looks like compared to say someone that's doing I don't know, like code for cluster? I mean, I know they're all like, a little hairline different, but I don't think cluster necessarily has like a docs and a tech review, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
So you want to talk about that?
So yeah, absolutely. SIGDocs uses owners files as well, but if you look at our owners file in the top level of K website, it's really apparent that we use another file as well called owners underscore aliases, and we make liberal use of owners underscore aliases. With SIGDocs, it may be a little daunting if you look at those at that owners sub aliases file, because SIGDocs uses a lot of different aliases. And we do that because we have not just our regular list of approvers and reviewers. We have broken those out by language because Kubernetes docs are available in multiple localizations, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, as well as English. So we have an alias for approvers, an alias for reviewers in every language that's currently available as a localization of Kubernetes. So what we do though is, I don't know if it was ever a formal convention or just a convention that everyone adopted, but there is an alias, like if you ever want to get on GitHub, if you were trying to signal a SIG for PR review, there's usually like a SIG dash node dash PR dash reviews alias, and SIGDocs has one as well, and that's specifically for people who can chime in on a PR at anywhere in the Kubernetes organization, anywhere in a Kubernetes project. So if you go for SIGDocs PR reviews, if that's what you enter, we use that same convention that other SIGs have used as well. So if you look at the owners. If you look at the owners file, if you look at the owners sub aliases file, and you're just completely lost and you need a review for docs, or just want to like chime in for awareness, then SIGDocs PR reviews is the alias that you can use on GitHub.
Awesome. It looks like UI uses owner aliases as well. I do know that some other groups also use that. That's awesome. So I want to go back to something really quick that we tabled earlier, which was Justin bringing up this concept of like go with what you know, and kind of go with what you're interested in, and when picking SIG. So one of the things that I hear a lot on the front lines is like, oh well, what SIG do I start contributing to? I hear that all of the time, probably once a day, to be quite honest. And I have a response to that, but I'm very curious. A, do you hear that from folks that you interact with? And B, what do you kind of counter that with? Because I do sometimes, and again, I'll tell you what my canned response is later, but a part of that canned response is like, go with what you know. And then it's, well, I know a lot. Or oh, I'll learn anything. And, it's kind of that like job interview where you're like, I'll do whatever you want. Oh my gosh, work at Google, like I'll wipe the floors, like what do you want me to do? That's kind of the passion and drive that I hear from a lot of our new contributors, is like, just tell me what to do. And Justin, I see you kind of moving and shaking. What do you say in those situations?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. Like, a great way would be like if you encounter a bug, like try to fix the bug, right? Or if you know more about something, or if you want to add support for something, then focus on that area. I think for people that don't have a strong affinity, I think the newer the project, or the more likely it is that you can still learn and add significant value purely by showing up and learning it as you go. Like, I think, like the AWS cloud provider, for example, is fairly subtle at this point and fairly mature in terms of the existing feature set. So I'm sure there are bugs still in there, but it would be difficult to like learn about AWS and go and like fix something in there, because probably at this point most of those things have been debated. I'm sure it's not entirely true, but like the odds are you're going to hit one of the things that has been debated many times before and we're sort of stuck with. Whereas you'll have a much less frustrating experience if you go into one of the more greenfield projects that doesn't necessarily have as much sort of like entrenched positions that have built up over the years, and where we have already figured out or like debated these things already, and it's sort of going to be frustrating for you coming in fresh to renegotiate them. So I think cluster API is very interesting in terms of, I mean, obviously I'm in C cluster lifecycle or very involved in C cluster lifecycle, so I have a narrow viewpoint, as I imagine most people do, but like cluster API is still relatively greenfield. SCD ADM is one that we're just getting started right now, very greenfield. Hopefully we'll have some stuff on add-on management, which will be fairly greenfield as well. Any of those things. So if you generally don't have an affinity, I would go more greenfield and stay, like, graduate later to the more entrenched projects. But I would encourage you to start with something that, like, scratch your own itch is definitely the best way to get into these things.
Yeah. And Zach, do you hear that? Do you hear that a lot? Or, I mean, I bet you probably just get contributors that are just like, I'm doing docs. Like, do you ever hear that though, where people say, I don't know where to start or anything like that?
We do, and I encourage folks to come to docs as if you don't know where to start. Well, first, Paris, I want to echo. I think your advice is really good. Do what you know, and I would say that SIGDocs is a great place to do what you know, because every area of Kubernetes is the docs touch on every area in Kubernetes. I think folks sometimes come in and are like, yes, I'm so enthusiastic about docs. I'm totally willing to do this. Tell me what to do. And I think it's a request for active mentorship and sort of active guidance. And unfortunately, we don't have the time or the energy, just the availability of people to do that kind of active mentor, like one-on-one mentorship with new contributors. So what we've done instead.
Welcome to Scalable Mentoring. Sorry,
so what we have done is tried to make sure that our contributing guide, if you go to kubernetes.io/docs/contribute, there is a well-established Kubernetes contribution guide for docs specifically. And that goes out, big shout out to Misty Linville, who did a lot of the heavy lifting for that overhaul. She did a really good job with overhauling the contribution guide. But there's basic contribution, intermediate, advanced. So there's a very sort of clear path to how you can specifically get involved. And Paris, I would take your advice to do what you know and focus that to docs to only fix what's wrong. You don't have to fix the entire English for the entire article. If you notice that a code sample is out of date or incorrect, you can totally submit a PR just to fix what's wrong. I think folks come in and are like, well, I can't fix everything, so I can't fix anything. And that's not true. You can just fix the parts that are wrong. And start there and build up your contributions and your involvement from there.
Super good advice. Thank you.
I think that actually sort of speaks to why I don't mind small PRs. And it's sort of my rule of thumb is that the amount of time it takes to get a PR done is sort of proportional to the square of the number of lines. So like if you change 4 things in one PR, 3 of them might be great. 1 of them might be, oh, I'm not so sure. So if those are 4 PRs, I can do looks good, and then let's talk about this last one. Whereas otherwise, that 4th one is going to sort of stay out there and block the other 3. And so that's why I'm like, let's just smaller is better, and I will type LGTM and approve all day if I have to. But that's better than
now we all know who to go to for
everyone. I'm the softie.
If you're listening out there, you go to Justin SB and ping him. Need an LGTM quick approve. Just kidding.
As long as it's short PRs, I will approve. Yeah.
Yeah. So if that label comes up with S, that guy right there.
The owner style doesn't mean that it might not do you a lot of good if I approve it, or I can LGTM in most directories, but I can't necessarily approve in most directories.
I have a feeling it's most directory. Anyway, all right. On this same note, though, on the same kind of note, what is your tips for reviewers and approvers and owners into getting them to use more good first issue labels, help wanted issues? The thing that I hear a lot from our current crew of folks in owners files is they just don't have the time to help folks through. B, they think that the problem is too complex. C, they think that it would be a lot of onboarding. B, they just don't do it. So what are some tips that help you kind of, I guess, task out both new and casual contributors? Because I think we have 17,000 plus contributors at this point. All of them are mostly casual, right? And from the casual contributors, one of the things that I heard from the feedback for the upcoming summit is that folks want to talk about how to engage more with casual contributors. So what are some tips that you can give to like those owners and folks out there who are not using those tools to help them get the help? Like how can they task out better? What are just some tips there?
Well, I will say first of all that what you have said is true. We struggle with time and availability as well. This is where I don't toe the party line, and where I admit that in SIGDocs we honestly don't pay a lot of attention to issues, because we have the choice to either pay attention to issues and try to triage issues appropriately, or focus on getting PRs through the review process. So we focus a lot of our effort onto PRs. So I guess I would say if there is someone who wanted to dedicate themselves exclusively to triage, you would be feted with roses, a parade in the streets, in SIGDocs. I would say I can talk a little bit about like my wish list. I wish that specifically like help wanted or good first issue, that those were labels that anyone could apply, not just org members, but that anyone could apply by like /command. I mean, would be a fairly straightforward piece to do. I mean, to implement those labels as a /command in like test infra. Test infra is the SIG that handles Prow, Kubernetes' in-house CI/CD system. It would be relatively straightforward to make those /commands, but handling them from anyone, whether they're inside the org or out, that would be more difficult, I suspect. But that would be my wish list, is for anyone to be able to apply those labels voluntarily, to self-apply. That would make those issues or PRs filterable through the PR dashboard, and that would be a much easier way for the reviewers on the bandwidth that we notify folks who need that kind of help or mentorship on PRs especially. So as an actual answer, I don't know how. I don't know, yep. But if I could build my own path, that's what that might look like.
That is an awesome point. And I think that's something that the steering committee is in favor of, which is creating roles. It's just kind of like a business where your department has different people that do different things. So, for instance, contributor experience, we're currently looking for a project manager. We're probably going to look for a triage person that you're talking about. So like cutting out and chiseling roles for people that are currently contributing gives them value. It gives your SIG value. I think that's an excellent point. And that's, I think, my tip too to maintainers is to ask people what they want to do, ask people if they want to contribute. If they say yes, then think about putting them on as maybe a casual contributor liaison, someone that can go in and look at your issues and apply labels, and then maybe just like walk people through it. and then we can reward and recognize them in ways. And if you're unsure of those, ping me. Justin, what about you? What are some of your tips in this case of like, how can maintainers better task out, I guess task out, I don't know if that's necessarily the right word, but task out, casual to new contributors?
I think I know I certainly don't do a good job on any of the repos I'm involved in with the help wanted labels. They tend to rot, I think. In other words, if they are genuinely good first issue type things, they get snapped up and done. And then we have the help wanted that actually turned out to be really difficult that are sort of stuck there. And we need to I guess I would need to review to make sure that we don't have those. Because those are just unhelpful. It's like we say it's great first issue, and it turns out actually there's like a massive complexity in there that we just weren't aware of when we tagged it. I think maybe a better way, I also am bad at keeping up with the issues, and I think maybe a better way for people to get involved might be to dig through recent-ish issues or old issues if they really want to, and try to sort of make sense of what's actually going wrong. And I think a lot of the fixes, a lot of the PRs that come in, all PRs should have an issue associated with them, and they can be a good source of, that can be a great way in because it's very helpful to me as a maintainer to see that. And, that doesn't mean you have to if you're a contributor, doesn't mean you have to send a PR, but you can sort of raise a conversation about how to maybe fix something and whether we believe something is an issue. And I think that would, on an issue, and I think that would be helpful to me. I don't know how I would encourage that, but I might try and we'll see what happens. I do very much like the idea of the most meta help wanted or good first issue that Zach raised, which is the good first issue is a good first issue bot. But as to the actual question at hand, I'm not sure I necessarily do a great job of it myself, and I don't think it is difficult, I think is the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a problem that we're all trying to solve, which is both good, and maybe we can collectively do it together. But that wraps up this session. So thank you both very much for your time. Jeff, thank you so much for the YouTube help. And that wraps up our December edition of Meet Our Contributors. I can't believe we did a whole year of this. We have 12 of these, y'all.
Congratulations. Yeah.
We have over 1,000 unique views. One of someone did a quick impromptu code base tour of Kubernetes and got over 500 within the first 24 to 48 hours. So this is scalable mentoring. People have questions all of the time, and we are here to answer them at least once a month. So that's it for me. Hope everybody has an awesome KubeCon, awesome new year, and we will see everybody back here January 2nd. Mentors, if you could stay on the line as we cut, that would be awesome. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.